From NBC 40 News, this is Forum 40.
Hey, good morning, South Jersey. I'm NBC 40 Chief Meteorologist Dan Skeldon, welcoming you to this weekend's Forum 40. As we do every year, the NBC 40 weather team wants to keep you ahead of the storm as far as hurricane season goes. Hurricane season peaks in September, and every year we welcome different meteorologists around the area to discuss the upcoming hurricane season, hurricane safety, and unfortunately with Irene and Sandy, we've had our fair share of hurricanes and tropical systems over the past couple of years. This year, first-time guest, but I'm a longtime fan and follower of Gary Szatkowski. He is a meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service office in Mount Holly, which is the office responsible for forecasting South Jersey. Gary, welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning.
All right. Dan, thank you very much for having me.
First off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, and I'm again in charge of the office there in Mount Holly for the National Weather Service, and have been there for 17 years. So seen a few things over that time period. The storms you mentioned, a lot of active winter and summer seasons. Moved around with the Weather Service. So before there, I was down in the Washington, D.C. area, did a couple jobs down there. And then before that, I was in Oklahoma City for 6 years. So learned a few things about tornadoes. And my very first duty station for the Weather Service was San Juan, Puerto Rico. So I learned a little bit about tropical. So moved around to those various locations and tried to learn things as I went.
And I think you made your name for yourself, and I've been very complimentary of both the National Weather Service office in Mount Holly, and I think you as the meteorologist in charge for the job you guys did during Sandy. I think it was such an intensely accurate forecast that you put out, and the dissemination of information and the products, I think, kept people and probably saved lives here in South Jersey. It's something we don't want to go through again, but let's chat a little bit about, the lessons learned from Sandy. How did Sandy and what we went through better prepare us in forecasting the next one?
I think what we always are looking at in those high impact weather events is how to communicate the threat, and what will it take to get the message across. And we know, I think, from our experience with Sandy and even with Irene, that you can't if you just put out a warning and then you put some information with it, that may or may not get the point across. So I think the big lesson we learned from Sandy, it was such a high impact event, and we saw people make some very good decisions based on the information they got, and we saw some people make some not so good decisions, with basically that same information set. So what we're looking at is how to even better leverage that information. Obviously you want the technical information in there. We're getting pretty good with the track forecast. We've still got some work to do with other things regarding tropical systems, but now it's more, a little bit more of the game is trying to get people to understand how to leverage that information so they get the best, bang for the buck, from the forecast they're getting.
How important do you think, social media has become in this? I know I follow you on Twitter, and I think the National Weather Service Mount Holly's on Twitter. People get, information, warnings immediately beep to their cell phone now with technology. Of course, television stations, radio stations, the more traditional ways of receiving that information. But I mean, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, how important is that in getting the correct information out there? And how do you, at the Weather Service, plan to capitalize on that?
Yeah, what we're trying to make sure we take advantage of the new tools as they come along. The obviously things that have been around a while, radio, TV, are still very big drivers of weather information. We know that post Sandy there were studies done, and people basically are still very reliant on those technologies. But there is a growing use of internet, social media. I think what you get with social media is a level of interaction. Sort of breaking as the system develops, or as the forecast changes or updates, that you can't really get. Basically you have a chance, a new forecast comes out, maybe a new track forecast for a hurricane, and now you also get a chance to interact with the weather office and maybe either ask some questions or just see what they're saying. Maybe some of the important things. What's different from this forecast versus the previous one? What should I be paying attention to?
Or you can call them on the cell phone. I mean, I'm not gonna embarrass you here, but I mean, I think one of the best products you put out, and I work this into all my talks, is knowing how grave of a storm Sandy was going to be. I mean, people are inundated with so much information and storm surge, coastal flood warnings and hurricane wind warnings and high wind warnings. I mean, you put out this personal plea basically via social networking and via a public information statement from the Weather Service saying, here's how bad it's going to be. If you doubt me, here's my personal cell phone number. I will personally answer your fears and your questions. And I think that interaction too, and that just level of just kind of bringing it down to the human level is huge in what you said. I mean, if a forecast is out there, that's fine, but that forecast has to be correctly understood and interpreted correctly by the public. So products like that, in addition to all the other products you put out, I think are integral in doing just that, getting the public to understand the forecast.
Yeah, and thank you again, for the positive comments you've made, in the past and today, about that. And what we were trying to do, I think really the big thing with Sandy was just the idea that it was going to be so beyond people's personal experience, unless someone had been through a significant hurricane event down probably somewhere on the Gulf Coast. It was really beyond anything anyone would have seen. Sandy was going to go beyond anything anyone would ever have seen around here during anyone's lifetime, and so that was really, in part, one of the drivers for the personal plea was just the idea that this is going to be, not just bad, but bad beyond anything, that you could possibly have based on experience. You're going to have to really kind of visualize or imagine just how bad it's going to be, and then make hopefully some good decisions based on it.
I think the biggest thing you and me and every other meteorologist out there was working against was Irene. I think if Irene hadn't happened, we would have been even better prepared for Sandy, because as we were chatting off camera, I think people compare an upcoming storm to the most recent storm they experienced. So Irene, we were fortunately spared the worst here in South Jersey. So I think the lack of impact from Irene definitely affected people's planning for Sandy, and so on and so forth. How do we break that? How do we teach the public more efficiently and effectively that every storm is its own and no two storms are alike?
It's an excellent question, and the answers, I think, are still to be determined. I think some of the stuff that you saw that we did during Sandy, the personal plea, the active use of social media, we put out briefing packages that people are designed to be kind of understood by the common, the layperson. They're not supposed to be highly technical, so we try to shy away from that. Those are things we're all trying to do to get that message across. And like I said, we saw some successes with Sandy where some people did the right decisions, whether at the individual level or an organization, but others didn't. And so what we want to try to do is, there's a lot of studies going on right now. Actually, even those briefing packages we put out from Mount Holly are undergoing their own study, where there's some social scientists who are using those as part of with focus groups to try to understand what worked on there and what didn't, and how to make those better. I think the main point to drive home with folks is that just because you've been through one hurricane doesn't mean you've been through everything a hurricane can throw at you, and that, as you pointed out with Irene the year before, I think that really did burden some people. I think they thought Sandy was going to be Irene round 2, and they remember how bad the inland flooding was with Irene, and the coastal impacts weren't so bad with Irene, and they really thought that was going to be kind of Sandy's story again. Of course, it was very different.
I think the biggest question people ask in August and September, all right, we've been through Irene, we've been through Sandy, are we going to go through one this year? So let's take a look at the 2014 Hurricane Outlook. This is issued by NOAA. Every year they come out with their forecast in June. So let's go to the graphic there, and this is the forecast for this year. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, sure. Basically, what we've got is, as opposed to previous years, a lot of people I think have gotten used to the above average forecast. We've had a lot of, the forecasts the past years have been above average, and this year is an exception that we're looking at now, where we're looking at either near or below normal conditions. Are kind of almost evenly divided. So below normal is slightly, rates at the top of the list, with near normal a close second. So the bottom line is we're looking at a season substantially less active than some of the very active years we've seen before. Again, like 2012, Sandy, letter S. We go alphabetically. The letter use alone, with Sandy tells you how many storms we had that season.
And then earlier this century, what was it, 2005, where we ran out of letters and we had to go to the Greek alphabet.
We went to the Greek alphabet, yeah, which was something new that I don't think we'd ever done before.
Right. So obviously, if you have more storms, you increase the chances of at least one of them hitting. But I think people do pay a little too much attention to the number, because what meteorologists always say is it only takes one.
Right.
So Is there any skill in determining what areas of, say, the East Coast or the Gulf Coast or the Caribbean, there's been a lot of improvements in the accuracy of the quantity of storms forecast. Has there been any improvements in depicting an area that is more likely to be hit than another?
No, that's an area where there's a lot of research work still to be done. There's a lot of people who are kind of right now still doing sort of pattern recognition, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's really what we'd like to do is actually have some scientific, rules or boundaries there that actually, based on the long-range forecast for the hurricane season, we'd say, okay, these kinds of seasons, this is what we would expect in terms of where the tracks would go. But right now we're not quite there yet. That's an area for the science still to work in advance. So the forecasting the numbers, we're getting better at that. Forecasting where they're going to go well in advance is still really new territory.
So as far as that forecast we put up, the below average season, that's something to, maybe quietly cheer about, because we are forecasting less storms than normal and less storms than we've seen in the past few years. But I'm always reminded that, Hurricane Andrew in '92, right. I believe there were 7 storms that year, and that, right. One storm defines a season. So I think the other message meteorologists say is don't pay too much attention to the number, because, whenever there's a storm out there, you guys are following it, the Hurricane Center's following it, and it only takes one storm.
It only takes one. One of the definitions I sometimes tell people of a bad hurricane season is if a hurricane strikes your region. That's your, at that point in time, you don't really care how many storms total there were, for the season as a whole. If it impacts you directly, people will be remembering, Sandy for, decades, and how many storms total there were that season, things like that will sort of quickly be forgotten.
Right. So we've come a long way, I think, in this hurricane forecasting. Dr. Gray from Colorado State helped. NOAA puts out great forecasts and great forecast products, long range every year. What I want to talk about coming up after the break is a little bit about what forecasts improvements have been made, or have any been made, regarding the track of a hurricane and the intensity of a hurricane. And we'll chat a little bit about that coming back with National Weather Service meteorologist in charge Gary Szatkowski when we come back on 4 & 40. Stay with us. And welcome back to 4 & 40, chatting with National Weather Service meteorologist in charge Gary Szatkowski. Glad he could be with us on this weekend morning, chatting hurricanes, and want to focus now on improvements, or have there been improvements made in 2 areas: track forecasting and intensity forecasting. And in one, vast improvements have been made, and the other is still a challenge, and this inexact science we're trying to evolve of meteorology. Let's start with the track forecasting, Gary.
So, that's really, the track forecast for hurricanes is really quite a success story that basically it's getting better and better each year. It's a fairly steady improvement, and it's due to both the science and computer horsepower, basically understanding what the atmosphere does, and then where the storm's going to go. A lot of people, if they go to the Hurricane Center website or go on to when you're covering a storm, they'll see sort of a cone or circles.
And let's bring up that map right now and show the improvements here. This cone should look familiar.
Right.
And what you have here, let's kind of describe what we're showing as far as the improvement in the size of this cone.
Right. Basically what's happened is we're comparing from about 6 years ago and then this year, that basically the cone has gotten smaller. And what that means, whether you're looking at a forecast 24, 48, 72 hours out, we have more confidence now. And so the threat area, the area where what that is designed to show is we'll always show a line, sort of like the best track forecast. But we know forecasting is not perfect, and so the question comes up: what is the range of possibilities, or where could the storm go? And this track, or the circles, or the cone rather, kind of show what the range of possibilities are, and it's gotten smaller. So that's good news, because in terms of whether it's evacuations or just deciding whether you're at risk or not, you've got the higher confidence in the track forecast.
And so it's less uncertainty as far as the size of the cone.
Higher confidence.
And higher confidence, which is great, and it does help emergency managers. It helps folks that may be along the track of a hurricane. Now, what about the intensity forecast? That's something that's been a little more challenging as far as trying to pinpoint will a storm strengthen, and if so, how much?
Right, it's been very frustrating. There's been actually this year the first time I've seen potentially some improvements in which we'd see in upcoming years in terms of some of the research, but it's been very frustrating over the past 5-10 years where we really haven't seen much improvement at all in terms of the intensity forecast, basically how strong the storm is going to get and the rate of increase of that if it intensifies. And we had really kind of a scary scenario with Hurricane Amanda, which most people did not hear about because it was in the Eastern Pacific. But basically it was the first storm of the 2014 season in the Eastern Pacific, and it went, the scientific term is it went berserk. Basically it went from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane, and there's only 5 levels on a rating scale for the hurricanes. It went from tropical storm to Category 4 in about a 36 to 48 hour period. Very rapid intensification, which was not forecast. So,
and that's what you're looking at here. You're looking
right.
at the multiple lines are the computer forecast as far as the intensity, and you can see how far above the actual storm how quickly it did intensify.
Right, that's actually what it did. The red line in there too is kind of is the forecast, that was issued at one point in time. Obviously, as it intensified, we adjusted the forecast, but that's kind of what I would say. If people were to say here along the Jersey Shore, what should we worry about? It would be, you go to bed thinking, maybe like a medium range Category 1 hurricane is threatening us in a couple days, and then you wake up the next morning and all of a sudden it's maybe a high-end Category 2, and that means a lot, stronger winds, a much more damage potential, much more storm surge potential. It goes up very rapidly. So those kinds of, that's where the focus is going to be in the future, is better intensity forecasting. A lot of research, a lot of energy being poured into it right now.
And you just mentioned category, and it's something people hear all the time. Category 1, Category 5, major hurricane, super typhoon. Let's talk a little bit about how we come up with that category. It's something called the Saffir-Simpson scale. Let's chat a little bit about that. Its strengths, and it has a lot of benefits, but it also has some things that are a little deceptive as well. And let's talk about it now.
Right, sure. This scale has been around for a while. Two gentlemen, Dr. Saffir, Dr. Simpson, developed it. And at one time it included wind, storm surge, barometric pressure, I think even wave heights, and that's really been backed off. Now it is just they've added the word wind to the title. It's now just a hurricane wind scale. The only thing you're talking about with the Saffir-Simpson scale now is how strong the winds are, which is very important. But we learned a number of things from using it over the years where it was very misleading. Sometimes we learned a lot of things regarding, like, for example, storm surge. Storm surge was huge with Sandy. And what we've learned over the years with storm surge is that besides just how strong the winds are, it's the size of the storm, physically how big an area, because hurricanes do come in different sizes, and the length of period that it's operating. A storm, say that's a Category 3 for several days, has a chance to build up a bigger storm surge with it than if it just became a Category 3. And so you weren't getting that level of information just by kind of saying, oh, it's a Category 3 or it's a Category 1. So now it's just a wind scale, and what we want you to do is we want people to focus on all the impacts, whether it's wind or storm surge, if you're along the coast, wave heights, if you're inland, rainfall amounts. Those things have to come from you and I. They come out from the products we issue or the broadcasts you make about those details. We don't want people relying on a number. If Category 1 hurricane is sort of designed to get your attention, and then after that they got to focus in on the details. The general public has to listen to what comes next.
And realistically, here in South Jersey, we'd never get a Category 4 or 5. I think probably our worst case is a 3. I mean, Sandy technically was 0, I guess, if you believe it. And essentially what that says is, you shouldn't focus on category number. You should focus on the word hurricane. I mean, that's that's the focus, whether it be a 1, 2, or 3, whether the storm surge be, 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet. Every hurricane's different. Every hurricane's going to deliver different impacts. And storm surge, especially here in South Jersey, is probably more of a concern than wind.
Yes, that would be sort of the scenario for maybe an unfortunate, I don't want to use the word, but I'll use the word,
right.
Catastrophic loss of life, more likely to occur from storm surge versus wind. We saw with Sandy, we saw that roughly half the fatalities were due to storm surge. And then everything else kind of dropped off pretty rapidly after that. So storm surge, up north was the big story with Sandy in terms of fatalities, and it would be the same case down here if we got big storm surge. So, and there's just so many variables. People focus. One of the reasons, why Sandy was bad was it came in right at high tide.
Right.
And that was, I see people sometimes trying to time it, and I'm like, don't do that. I said, basically, when we give you the numbers, we want you to assume it's going to come in at high tide, because you can only know for sure maybe 6 hours before the storm makes
right.
landfall, and that's too late. You can't leave at that point in time. You're going to be trapped, and you don't want to be trapped and have made a terrible decision in the process.
I think one great thing, and one of the best new products that the National Hurricane Center puts out, is a new storm surge map. And that was a misunderstood term. It was a very well forecast term during Sandy, but I even heard media saying, hey, a 14-foot storm surge is coming into New York. And, it wasn't a 14-foot storm surge, it was the total height of the water. So if the media is miscommunicating this term, obviously folks at home are going to be confused. So National Hurricane Center, one of the great products they've had tested for a while and just implemented this year, is a new map that helps you visualize exactly what the impact's going to be. Let's show that map, and Gary, let's talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it, and we've been talking about this for a number of years, and this year it's come to fruition. And actually, we did have Hurricane Arthur here on the East Coast, and we did launch that, and we're doing some graphics that were mainly, obviously, for impacts down in North Carolina. But basically, what it does is it shows the areas of inundation, and you've got kind of a not too complicated color scale. Basically 4 levels showing how deep the water is going to get. And the idea is if you're shaded in at all, you're going to get wet, and that's probably a good idea you should probably think about leaving at that point in time. Anyway, even if it's just a foot or two of water. And obviously it could be a lot more than that, and it could be which could be catastrophic. And that's really one of the big things, again, lessons learned from Sandy from a social science or human impact standpoint. One of the things we heard was that even people who understood the forecast and did the right things to the north of here, particularly where the storm surge got higher, along the barrier islands, they really underestimated how far inland the water would go. They because again it went beyond any type of experience base, they could kind of visualize the water getting even higher along the barrier islands. But what they couldn't see is, or understand, was that meant the water was going to go like 5 miles inland, more than they'd ever seen before. And so we heard, we had stories from up north where people evacuated, or businesses moved their supplies from one place to another place, and that place flooded too because they thought they moved it to a safe spot. It was inland, but it wasn't any higher than the other spot before. Hadn't flooded before during a storm, or whether it was a hurricane or a nor'easter, but this time it did. And we hope a map like this will help a lot of people make very good decisions during a real crisis time. When it's not easy to make a decision to evacuate.
Right, and that sample map was for the Fort Myers area. It was just a sample storm, but a very easy, like you said, easy to understand color scale, and an easy key saying, all right, this area is going to have 6 feet of water, this area is going to have 9, and it's something I think that with so much of South Jersey low-lying, not only the barrier islands, but so many bays and inlets and so on and so forth, it's something that can better prepare people for the storm.
We hope so. And there's some assumptions sort of baked in there that we want people to know about. Because again, like with Sandy, we assume that the storm is going to come in at high tide.
Right.
We also assume, that what's called the reasonable worst case scenario. So, that kind of takes into account if the storm gets a little stronger, or, the worst of the storm surge comes right your way. We're trying to take into account people, kind of sometimes jokingly, comment about forecasts, and they are getting more accurate, but at times, but we still don't, they're not 100% accurate in terms of what we can say exactly is going to happen. This is designed to kind of err on the side of caution, that if you're going to, if you should evacuate, you should, evacuate. But if you're kind of looking to protect stuff, who wants to raise their items, 2 feet, their personal valuables or whatever, a couple feet, and then it turns out they got 3 feet of flooding, so the stuff still got wet. This is designed that if you do take protective action, you should be okay. That this is erring on the side of caution. If you're going to build, if you're going to get 2 feet of flooding, you want to build a 3-foot wall of sandbags around your, property or your, the structure you're trying to protect. You don't want to underestimate. So this should hopefully, err on the side of safety.
I think this map, and then also just having experience, Sandy, as bad as it was, I mean, doesn't it kind of give us a focal point, a comparison point? Because South Jersey and the entire Jersey Shore really didn't have a direct hurricane impact. Irene was kind of a bust for most of us. We got scraped with, Gloria, but not necessarily directly, and then Bell in 76, and you got to go back to the 44 storm or the 62 nor'easter. So what Sandy does is it gives a reference point where people can say the next time, while it won't be Sandy, you can say, all right, this will come 1 foot less than Sandy or 2 feet more than Sandy, and it does give that point of reference. In addition with the maps, I think will definitely clear up any storm surge confusion.
It's definitely, we're hoping it's going to be a step in the right direction. Well, like I said, we launched the product here with Arthur. We've gotten, some good feedback so far from the experience down in North Carolina. Arthur was just sort of on the edge of Category 2, so it wasn't a huge stress test, but it was a good test, for the graphic. And if something should threaten, our neck of the woods, in terms of the hurricane season, people should anticipate seeing this graphic and be prepared to use it.
And what do you say, and I always like to ask any meteorologist or emergency manager that comes in this question, what do you say to people that say, all right, we're going to ride this one out? All right, I know there's a mandatory evacuation order, but we think, A, we have the supplies, B, we have the stamina, we don't want to leave our home, we have pets. What do you say to the stubborn folks that, lesson never learned, they're going to stay regardless?
Yeah, there's obviously Sandy scared people, and then sometimes that helps. But I mean, I want to tell people that you should learn from experience, but not be blinded by experience. That Brett Favre, the football player down in Mississippi, they got themselves into some serious trouble with Katrina, and the reason why he was on the family property estate, whatever, and they were like literally carrying nieces and nephews on their shoulders to a house that was higher up on the property. And the reason why they didn't evacuate was because an older person in the family had said, "Oh, we rode out Camille in '69 and we were fine, so we'll be okay." That was nearly a disaster. They nearly lost their lives in Katrina, just based on using something from 30 or 40 years earlier. The forecast with Katrina was fine. There was that area was going to get flooded, and they took a risk. So I just, I tell people err on the side of caution. I said, we're a society where something inappropriate is found in a food or drink item, and we recall, thousands of cases off the shelves of this stuff. And if it's something a child or an infant would drink, it's, is even more, And here, a killer hurricane is coming up the coast. Don't take a chance that you could regret for the rest of your life.
And it's something we hope that we don't have to worry about this year, but right through November 30th, right, hurricane season does continue. Gary Szatkowski from the National Weather Service, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Hopefully, again, we will not be tested, but if we are, NBC 40 weather team and the hardworking folks at the Weather Service both have the same goal in mind, and that is to keep you safe, keep you out of harm's way, and most importantly, keep you alive. Thank you for joining us on Forum 40 this morning. Have a great weekend.